Welcome, everyone. Before we even really get into it today, I just want to offer a heartfelt divine blessing for your day and for the entire week ahead.
That is a really beautiful way to start.
Yeah, I just hope that you find clarity and peace and deep purpose in whatever it is you are facing right now. It is genuinely just so good to have you joining us.
Absolutely. We are thrilled you're here with us.
And today we are embarking on a deep dive into an ancient text that you might actually think you already know inside and out. We are looking at Exodus chapter 8.
Right. And the sources on the table for this exploration are incredibly detailed. We're using scholarly notes from two very comprehensive texts.
The Holman Study Bible and the NAA.
Yes, the Nova Almeida Actualizada Study Bible. And it is a privilege to be here with you to unpack them because those two particular sources are invaluable.
They really are. They don't just give you a surface-level summary.
Exactly. They refuse to do that. They dig into the historical context and the linguistic nuances, and there are some fascinating structural breakdowns in there that fundamentally change the way you interact with the text.
Yeah, you realize pretty quickly we aren't just reading a sequence of random events.
No, we are looking at a deeply layered historical and theological document.
Which perfectly sets the mission for our deep dive today. I promise you right now, this is not going to be a simple recounting of an old, familiar Sunday school story.
Definitely not.
We're going to unpack the hidden literary structures, the intense cultural clashes of the ancient Near East, and the profoundly surprising psychology of a ruler who is operating under immense pressure.
Unprecedented pressure, really.
Right. And we're focusing specifically on the plagues of the frogs, the gnats, and the flies. Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to start with a structural element in the NAA study notes that completely reframe the entire narrative for me.
You're talking about the mathematical precision of how these events are laid out.
Yes, exactly.
It is something so easily missed when you are just reading the text casually. When you look at the first 9 plagues, they are not a random, chaotic list of disasters.
No, they're deliberately organized.
Right into 3 distinct cycles, with 3 plagues in each cycle. The 10th plague, the firstborn, stands alone as the final tragic climax. But looking at those first 9...
Cycle 1 includes the blood, the frogs, and the gnats.
Exactly. And cycle 2 brings the flies, the livestock disease, and the boils.
While cycle 3 consists of the hail, the locusts, and the darkness.
It's incredible.
It reads like a highly organized military campaign. Instead of just a chaotic escalation of bad things happening one after another, the text reveals this highly deliberate strategy.
And within those cycles, our sources point out a brilliant recurring pattern.
This blew my mind.
In every single cycle, the first 2 plagues come with a very specific direct warning to Pharaoh.
Right. Moses is instructed to go to Pharaoh in the morning or to present himself to the king.
He explicitly gives him a chance to respond and alter his course.
Huh.
But the 3rd plague at each of those cycles,
the gnats in the first, boils in the second, and darkness in the third.
Hits with absolutely zero warning.
Zero. It just happens.
What's fascinating here is the psychological warfare inherent in that structure. The warnings establish authority. They demand a response and provide a window for diplomatic surrender.
But those unannounced third strikes,
they demonstrate absolute sovereign control over when and how the pressure is applied.
Wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, especially for you listening, if you appreciate strategy and clear structures, this demonstrates that this wasn't just a sequence of random magical parlor tricks.
No, the text is portraying a highly calculated, systematic dismantling of the most powerful nation in the world at that time.
Because Egypt was the absolute superpower of the ancient world.
Right, their entire society, their agriculture, their economy, their political hierarchy, it was all built on the idea that their gods controlled the natural order.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Pharaoh himself was considered a divine mediator of that order, a concept the Egyptians called Ma.
Mahat.
Right. So this 3x3 structure shows a sovereign power systematically proving that the Egyptian gods were entirely powerless to maintain that order.
It is a methodical deconstruction of their entire worldview.
It really is.
Which is an incredible transition into the reality of that deconstruction. Starting with the second plague, which is the frogs. Now, the commentary really leans into the sensory nightmare of this event.
Oh, it is a nightmare.
It's so easy to gloss over, but the text insists that the frogs are going to be everywhere. They're coming into the houses, into the royal bedrooms, onto the beds. They're infiltrating the ovens and the kneading bowls.
Imagine the sheer horror and absurdity of trying to bake bread and your dough is just pulsating with amphibians.
Just pulsating. It's disgusting.
It is a profoundly visceral image,
Mm-hmm.
and it strikes at the heart of Egyptian domestic and religious life.
Let's talk about the religious side, because the historical context here is vital.
Right. The Egyptians worshipped a goddess named Hecate. She was depicted with the head of a frog.
Okay.
She was associated with fertility, water, and childbirth. Frogs were considered sacred symbols of life.
So there is a deep irony here. The very symbol of their fertility and blessing multiplies so uncontrollably that it becomes an unbearable curse.
Exactly. A sacred animal is turned into a suffocating pestilence.
And what the study notes highlight here is the severe limitation of Pharaoh's advisors. Pharaoh's magicians actually managed to replicate this plague using their occult sciences,
They make more frogs appear on the land.
which is arguably the least helpful thing you could possibly do in the middle of a national frog infestation.
Right, you don't need more frogs. But it exposes the sheer impotence of their power. They can mimic the chaos, but they are completely unable to reverse it.
They have no authority to establish order or clean up the mess or stop the invasion.
None. They can only add to the destruction. And that specific failure forces Pharaoh into a very uncomfortable, unprecedented position,
He has to summon Moses and Aaron and actually enter into negotiations.
which is huge for a living God to do.
He essentially begs Moses to pray to his God to take the frogs away. And Moses does something brilliant here. He tells Pharaoh, "You have the glory over me. You pick the time."
Putting the ball entirely in Pharaoh's court.
Exactly. He is saying you dictate exactly when you want the frogs gone down to the minute, so that when it happens, you and your entire court will know unequivocally that it wasn't a natural coincidence.
It was a targeted divine action.
Yes.
This raises an important question about the psychology of power. Moses gives Pharaoh a blank check to end his nation's profound misery.
He can end the public health crisis, the stench, the chaos immediately.
And yet when asked when the frogs should be removed, Pharaoh responds with one word: tomorrow.
Tomorrow. It is arguably one of the most baffling responses in ancient literature.
I mean, if there are frogs in my bed, in my oven, and
Right.
covering my floors, I want them eradicated right this very second.
Yes. The commentary dives deep into the absurdity of this response to reveal Pharaoh's deeply irrational stubbornness.
It completely defies all logic until you view it through the lens of a supreme ruler desperately clinging to his ego.
Because why endure one more night of frogs?
Because saying immediately feels like an absolute unconditional surrender. By saying tomorrow, Pharaoh is making a desperate psychological attempt to maintain a fragile illusion of control.
Oh, wow. So he's trying to dictate the terms.
Yes, to feel like he is still the one initiating and managing the timeline of events. He is willing to let his people suffer and suffer himself just to flex a tiny ounce of remaining authority.
It is the ultimate example of ego overriding common sense. I will suffer through one more agonizing night in a frog-infested palace just so I can tell my court that I set the schedule.
Exactly.
But in doing so, he implicitly acknowledges the overwhelming power of the Hebrew God. He admits publicly that his own magicians, the brightest minds in Egypt, cannot fix this crisis.
And he is entirely reliant on Moses' God for salvation.
And we see the aftermath of that. The frogs die off, they're gathered into massive rotting heaps, and the entire land stinks.
A massive public health disaster.
But Pharaoh gets his temporary relief. Yet, true to the cycle of human pride, the moment he has breathing room, he hardens his heart and goes right back on his word.
Which forces the escalation to the third plague. And this is where that structural rule we discussed kicks in.
The unannounced one.
Right, the gnats, or lice or mosquitoes as our sources mention, scholars still debate the exact translation of the Hebrew word kinnim.
But whatever they are, they hit without a single word of warning. Aaron simply strikes the dust of the earth with his staff, and all the dust throughout the land of Egypt turns into insects on man and beast.
The symbolic weight of striking the dust is immense. Egypt's entire wealth, their agriculture, their survival, depended on the fertile soil of the Nile Valley,
The earth itself was deeply revered.
often associated with the god Kemba. By turning the very ground they walked on into a source of relentless torment, the text is showing that the foundational elements of Egyptian life are being weaponized against them.
And here's where it gets really interesting. It's here in the dust that the magicians hit their absolute breaking point.
Yes, they try to use their occult sciences to produce the gnats, just like they replicated the blood in the frogs.
But they fail.
The text is definitive. They could not. Their streak of mimicry is broken.
And they're forced to go to Pharaoh, a man they revere as a living god, and deliver a devastating intelligence report. They tell him, "This is the finger of God."
That specific phrasing is so important.
The finger of God. It's incredibly striking. It's not the hand of God or the arm of God, which usually denote great strength or military might in biblical poetry.
Right.
It's just the finger.
It is deeply significant, and the commentary emphasizes this point beautifully. The magicians are not merely admitting a temporary defeat.
They're conceding to a power that is operating on a scale they can scarcely comprehend.
Exactly. To turn the vast dust of the entire Egyptian empire into a plague of insects is a catastrophic nationwide event.
But they describe it as minimal effort.
Yes, requiring only the absolute minimal effort from this deity, just a single digit. It's as if they are telling Pharaoh, we are completely outmatched. This entity isn't even flexing its full strength yet.
This is just a tap of its finger, and our entire magical and religious system is collapsing.
It puts the political reality into sharp focus. The top spiritual and scientific advisors of the ancient world's superpower are waving the white flag.
They're looking at their king and saying, this isn't magic. This is an entirely different category of power.
But Pharaoh, trapped in his own hardened worldview, refuses to listen to his own experts.
Which is just, it's tragic. And his refusal necessitates a shift in strategy, which brings us to the fourth plague, the swarms of flies.
And here the study notes highlight a massive, fundamental shift in how the plagues operate from this point forward.
We see the introduction of a crucial new dynamic, the geography of protection.
Or the concept of divine separation.
Up until this point, the plagues of blood, frogs, and gnats seemed to affect the entire land indiscriminately. Everyone suffered.
But with the flies, God explicitly tells Pharaoh that he will deal differently with the land of Goshen.
And for you listening, Goshen was the eastern delta region of Egypt, where the Israelites were primarily settled.
The text specifically states that God draws a boundary line separating Goshen so that no swarms of flies will be there.
Both the NAA and the Holman Notes emphasize that this separation serves a highly specific theological and psychological purpose.
It proves God's sovereign, localized presence right in the middle of Egyptian territory.
It sends a terrifying message to Pharaoh. God isn't just a distant, abstract deity launching chaotic attacks from the heavens.
He is actively present in the land, capable of drawing a precise microscopic boundary line and protecting his people in perfect peace, while the rest of the country falls into absolute ruin.
The psychological toll of that visible separation must have been staggering. Imagine being an Egyptian official or a citizen living right on the border of Goshen.
Looking across the line.
Yes. Your home is overwhelmed. Your livestock are panicking. You are covered in these biting swarms, and you look right across the property line, and your Israelite neighbors are just going about their day completely untouched.
The visible proof of divine favoritism and protection is undeniable. It breaks down the last remnants of Egyptian theological security.
Their gods cannot protect them, but the God of the enslaved Hebrews can perfectly protect his own.
And this intense psychological pressure finally causes Pharaoh to crack again. He summons Moses and offers a political compromise.
He says, go sacrifice to your God, but do it here in this land.
He is willing to allow a religious festival, but he refuses to let them leave the borders of his control.
And Moses outright refuses the compromise. He says, it is not right to do so. But the reasoning Moses gives is where we find one of the most profound cultural clashes in the entire narrative.
Yes, this is fascinating.
Moses tells Pharaoh that sacrificing right there in Egypt would be an abomination to the Egyptians. He poses the question, if we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us?
The historical context provided by the sources regarding this abomination is absolutely vital. This wasn't a minor logistical disagreement or a simple difference in worship styles.
It was a huge deal.
The Israelites, as a pastoral people, would be sacrificing animals from their flocks and herds, specifically sheep, goats, or cattle.
Right.
In ancient Egyptian culture, many of these animals were profoundly sacred. The Apis bull, for instance, was widely worshipped, and deities like Num were depicted with the head of a ram.
So to publicly slaughter an animal that your neighbors literally worship as a physical manifestation of the divine wasn't just culturally insensitive.
No, it was a sacrilege of the highest order.
Moses is pointing out the stark, practical reality of the situation. He is basically telling Pharaoh, if we hold our religious festival here in the middle of your cities and start systematically slaughtering the very animals your citizens hold sacred, it's going to incite a massive, violent riot.
Your people will literally stone us to death in the streets to protect their gods.
It highlights a deep, irreconcilable cultural and religious chasm. Pharaoh is trying to maintain political control by keeping the labor force within his borders.
But Moses is exposing the fact that the worship of the Hebrew God is fundamentally and violently incompatible with the idolatry of Egypt.
There can be no compromise, no shared space. They have to leave. They need a 3-day journey into the wilderness to create the necessary physical and spiritual distance to worship authentically.
It's a brilliant diplomatic and theological maneuver by Moses. He uses Egypt's own religious laws against Pharaoh to prove why the Israelites must be granted their freedom to leave.
Pharaoh is cornered by his own culture sensibilities.
Exactly. He begrudgingly agrees to let them go into the wilderness, but he adds his own desperate caveat. Only you shall not go very far away.
He is still trying to keep a leash on them, still trying to dictate the terms of their obedience.
So Moses accepts the terms, he prays, and the swarms of flies are removed. The text notes with that same mathematical precision that not a single fly was left.
It is a total miraculous reversal.
Synthesizing all of this, when we look deeply at the notes from our sources, these chapters truly are a masterclass in reading between the lines of ancient history.
They really are.
They reveal so much more than a simple narrative of plagues and pests. We see the absolute humiliating limits of worldly power, how all the occult science, military might, and royal authority in the greatest empire on earth cannot reverse a single divine judgment.
We see the dangerous, deeply irrational stubbornness of human pride, embodied in a king who is willing to suffer and let his nation suffer just to say tomorrow instead of surrendering today.
And we see the profound cultural realities of the ancient Near East, where faith, agriculture, and society were so tightly intertwined that true worship of the God of Israel required complete and total separation from the systems and the gods of Egypt.
It wasn't just about geographic relocation.
No, it was about an entire paradigm shift.
It really makes you reconsider the depth and the gravity of the entire story. Before we wrap up our deep dive today, I actually want to leave you listening with a final thought to mull over.
Something to explore on your own.
Exactly, something that builds on what we've been discussing regarding human nature, because this narrative provides such a clear mirror for our own behaviors.
It absolutely does.
Look closely at Pharaoh's pattern of behavior at the very end of chapter 8. After the flies are completely removed, the text is brutally explicit. He hardened his heart yet again.
But notice the timing.
Yes. It happens at the exact second he feels relief from the disaster. The exact moment the pressure drops, his promises vanish. I want you to think about human nature, maybe even patterns in your own life or the lives of those around you.
Right.
How often do people make desperate promises or sweeping emotional vows to change their behavior when they are right in the middle of a crushing crisis?
It is a very common psychological response to pain.
But the second the pressure is off, the second the metaphorical frogs or the flies disappear from their lives, they immediately revert to their old ways.
They forget the desperation completely.
This raises a profoundly important question for you to chew on as you go about your day. What does that reality say about the true nature of lasting change?
That's a great question.
Does real foundational transformation require something much deeper than just the removal of our immediate pain or our current negative circumstances?
That is a deeply provocative question to leave with. It suggests that true change requires a fundamental softening of the heart and a shift in identity, not merely a temporary change in our environment.
Exactly.
It has been an absolute pleasure unpacking these incredible layered texts with you today.
The pleasure was all mine. And thank you so much to everyone tuning in for this deep dive into Exodus 8. We hope you found some genuine aha moments in there that challenge how you view this ancient text. God blesses all the listeners. Have an absolutely amazing week, and we will see you next time.